did a lecture around 2000, 2001 on the Battle of New Orleans, similar to the one I did yesterday. And I was always perplexed by the fact that Andrew Jackson had absolutely no regard for Jean Lafitte. He considered him a pirate, a bloody banditti. And Andrew Jackson had the nickname Old Hickory. And a lot of people say that's because it's a hardwood. And the more reading I did, I discovered that no, hickory is a difficult wood to work with. Not the same thing. And Andy Jackson was one of these stubborn individuals who wasn't inclined to change his mind. But he did when it came to Jean Lafitte. And I raised that question in a lecture. And after it was over with, a gentleman, I think his name is John Smith, what a wonderful name. He was the reenactor, Dominic Yu. And he walked up after the lecture and he looked at me. He says, "You raised a question." I said, "Yeah." He says, "I have an answer for you." I said, "Really?" He says, "One word, Mason." And he walked out. I said, "Okay." Well, my father was a Mason, my grandfather, my great-grandfather. And I don't join anything, so I guess I broke the circle. But I was familiar with the sense of brotherhood and what they believe in. So I started digging into it, and that's what brought me to where we are. And excuse me if I turn my back to you so I can see what's going on. Oh, okay. Duh, it's right here too, I'm like William, must be a little bit of inbreeding going on, So, yeah, I just tend to look behind me. Okay, so basically you're looking at rejected Lafitte, then they embraced him. What happened? Oh, my God, I got to read it, though. Was very strong and often highly opinionated, as I said, So no, I definitely can't read that. I got to turn this way. So they referred to them as ruthless banditti. And when they were approached with pardoning, he refused to pardon them. He refused to have anything to do with them. Then his friend, Edward Livingston, who will be actually serving his cabinet when he becomes president, they're very close. They get together, and he was the attorney for the Baratarians, which, of course, they desperately needed with what they were doing. And suddenly, you find Jackson meeting with Lafitte. Now, there's some stories about that, where they met or what the story was. But they do get together. Lafitte offers what he has available, which is, at this time, gunpowder and flints, and also some of the Baratarians to work within Jackson's lines. Jackson gives them what they request, which is pardons, and a friendship develops, to the point where in the battle itself, supposedly, Jackson rode down the line one time, ran across Dominic Yu, who supposedly is, some argue, Lafitte's half-brother, smelled coffee, asked for a cup, gave it to him, and then Jackson looks at Dominic Yu and says, "Is it smuggled?" And he says, "Do you like it?" And supposedly after that, every morning Jackson stopped by Dominic Yu to get his cup of coffee. So this beautiful friendship actually develops. So basically what happens, you find out this, when it's over with, General cannot avoid giving his warm approbation to the manner in which the gentlemen, imagine that, not bloody banditti, the gentlemen have uniformly conducted themselves, and of the gallantry with which they have redeemed the pledge they gave at the opening of the campaign to defend the country. That's a stark change, okay? How? Why? What happened here? Let's talk for a second about our dear friends, the Baratarians. First of all, they consider themselves privateers. As privateers and as pirates. Pirates attack ships at sea, seize them, seize the crew, seize the ship, sometimes murder the crew and the passengers, and take everything for themselves. Privateers do the same thing. So what's the difference? A privateer is sailing under a letter of marque, which means under some country. Jean Lafitte is now using letter of marque from Cartagena, which is basically a city in Colombia which decided to determine its independence. And so they use that letter of marque, which gives them a flag. So therefore, they supposedly can't be hung because they're not privates, they're privateers. So there goes the difference, okay? So controversy about the name. We can talk about Lafitte because I wanted to steer into this for a second. We're live? Thank you. Good now? Yes, thank you. Okay. So, the spelling of the name is an interesting thing because Jean Lafitte National Park, Lafitte Society, it's L-A-F-I-T-T-E. Okay, then you got Laffite. There's two totally different spellings here. Which is correct? Laffite is the proper spelling, according to William Davis, who's the authority on this. In the privateer's biographer, they spelled their name with two F's and not one T. That's important because when people had forgeries about his spelling of the name. So that's where you find in documents which is the real Lafitte and what relates to it. What did he look like? He's often described as handsome, friendly, enjoyed drinking in the company of women. He's French. Also dressed in an aristocratic manner and adopted similar mannerisms. But what did he actually look like? Well, it's interesting because you get a variety. You have that, and then you have this, which is probably the famous one. And you got this. And of course, you've got Yul Brynner. Kind of lost his hair. Then you have Lafitte, Claiborne, and Jackson. And if you notice, there is a bit of a similarity between these two. Pierre, Lafitte, and Dominique You. These are the three, supposedly, these two are half-brothers. And then suppose there's a sketch of Lafitte by Jean-Martin Lapole, Massard, and this is his actual signature. And you notice two F's. Okay? Who are the privateers? It's a pirate's life. Don't we hear that when we go to Disney World? It's a pirate's life for me. Smuggling was endemic into Louisiana throughout the French and Spanish period. Smuggling is just avoiding taxes and bringing things in. They operated out of Grande Terre, which was their main base. So the ships would come in from the Gulf. They would unload everything. They'd go out with their experiences again. And it seems that Jean Lafitte was more a fence than more an active pirate himself. That's not to say he didn't conduct those affairs, but that seems to be what he had. And he wasn't in command of the situation totally like he dominated it in ownership or control. They just more or less allowed him, since he was a fence, he kind of became the spokesman and the authority, but there was a lot of tension sometimes among themselves. They were fiercely independent individuals. That's why they were pirates. They couldn't get along with people. The three brothers, Jean, Pierre, and of course Frederick, who some say was his half-brother, Dominique You. And the public opinion was in strongly in favor of the Lafitte's. Why? Because they were running the ultimate Walmart, in the sense that the Americans here had to pay tariffs. We're talking about tariffs now. Tariff is a tax on goods coming in. Tariffs were relatively high. So if you have to purchase a good as an American businessman, purchase a good, retail, pay to have it shipped in, then pay a tariff on it, you have to raise your price to make a profit. But if you steal it, smuggle it in, and don't pay any taxes, you can sell it quite low and still make a handsome profit. And of course, everybody loves a low price. So as a result, the Creoles, French and Spanish, loved working with Jean Lafitte because he was bringing in so much. Additionally, after 1808, federal law ruled the slave trade illegal. Building up on what William said, with the sugar plantations, there was a great need for slaves. Jean Lafitte was smuggling in slaves as well, okay? So that's why he runs into problems with the American authorities, because in 1812 we become a state and Claiborne becomes governor. He's responsible for fulfilling his requirements to enforce federal law, which means tariffs, the end of slave trade. And that's where the Lafittes and Claiborne start knocking heads. Also had enemies. Like I said, the American merchants, customs officials, shippers, and the governor himself. And they supposedly here operated out of Lafitte's blacksmith shop. Probably not. They had an apartment, I believe, right across the street where they lived, but for the most part, they operated out of a warehouse, they think, somewhere on Wall Street. As I understand it, would basically be, there would be some goods there, but mostly individuals would go there and they would have the invoice, so to speak, or an inventory of what the Lafittes had gathered in that time. You would go down, find the things you want, then you'd go down to Grande Terre yourself, pick it up, and bring it back home again, okay? This is Lafitte's blacksmith shop, which is likely where they did not operate. Wall Street. Here you have an idea of where Grande Terre is, and here you have another picture. This is done by, it's hard to make out, G.T. Ross, who was a commander who would invade Barataria. Okay, so you have the idea, this is where everything is on Grande Terre, Lafitte's operation. Problems with the pirates, with smuggling operations, illegal importation of slaves, and attack on friendly nations. They were indiscriminate. Supposedly, they were only supposed to go after Spanish or British. Did he die?
He died.
Oh, well, that was short-lived. Supposedly, they would go after do you hear me now? Okay, good. After they're not supposed to go after friendly nations, but they were somewhat indiscriminate in who they went after. There was a profit, is basically what they were on. They seek help from the legislature. Claiborne is now struggling with the legislature to try to get orders against the Lafitte's. Trouble is, a significant portion of the legislature are Creole, and they're benefiting from the relationship. So they're not inclined necessarily to help him out. Sounds kind of familiar. Lafitte's orders his arrest for smuggling. So he's out aggressively trying to get him arrested. And of course, that doesn't really work well because he fails to appear in court 6 times. He just don't show up. Meantime, he's walking throughout the city streets in the French Quarter, and nobody will apprehend him because he's Jean Lafitte, and we're profiting. So they just have absolutely no regard for the American governor and the American laws. As a result, Claiborne becomes angry, decides, I'll fix this. I'll put a $500 reward on Lafitte's head. They'll turn him over for that. Of course, Lafitte retaliates by putting a $1,500 reward on Claiborne's head. 2 can play this game. So this goes to show you what's developing in this relationship, and tensions increase as these commercial enterprises continue, and Claiborne now decides he's got to take some military action. This is where things get sticky for Jean. August 1814. He's down in Barataria, and a ship shows up. He assumes it's American, so he's prepared for the worst. Suddenly it strikes its colors, and it's a British sloop of war. So as the story goes, he rows out to it. Has some guys row him out, and at that time a boat is dropped, long boat, and comes the other direction. And he asks them what they want. I said, we want to see Jean Lafitte. Is he there? He says, I don't know. Why don't you come on? He's not about to tell them. He's a pirate, for God's sakes. The British are ready to hang him. So when he comes lands on Grande Terre, he then informs them, I'm Jean Lafitte. What do you want? And that's when the British acquaint him with the carrot and the stick. The British have designs on New Orleans, and they know Jean Lafitte knows every waterway into the city. So they tell him, this is the deal, Jean. You work with us, we'll give you a captaincy in the British Navy, land anywhere you want it that we possess in the Caribbean, $30,000 in gold, and pardons for all your men. You don't go along with us, we hang you and destroy Barataria. These are your options. Jean Lafitte then says, well, okay, I appreciate that, but I'm not in control here. A lot of my guys are at sea. Give me a fortnight to think about it. So the British agree. So they sail off. Jean Lafitte is there with a guy named Bank, who is one of the members of the legislature, a Frenchman. Surprising. I remember the legislature with smugglers, huh? So anyway, Jean gives his documents from the British to him. He brings it to Claiborne. Claiborne has a committee of public safety which is composed of Americans and Creoles. They debate what to do about this. The Creoles are saying, listen to Jean. He's giving you critical information that the British are trying to find a back way into the city. The Americans are like saying, but he's conferring with the enemy. That makes him a treasonous person. Claiborne leans in that direction. So as a result, what ends up happening, in September 1814, Colonel Ross, that's where that picture comes from, that map, with gunboats attacks Grande Terre and destroys everything that's there. Interesting, one of the boats is used is the Carolina, which is a boat that would be used by Jackson against the British in the Mississippi River in the night battle of the 23rd. They destroy Barataria, seize a lot of the goods that are there. Jean's not there, but they arrest a number of his people. Dominic Yu, in particular, his half-brother, arrested. The Baratarians are now being prosecuted by civil officers of the United States. I cannot and will do nothing in this matter. That's Andrew Jackson. When they approach him for pardons, he says, not my affair, out of my jurisdiction, want nothing to do with it. He refuses to pardon them, refuses them to give them any kind of help whatsoever. They eventually get out because the Dominic Augustin Hall releases you and the other Baratarians. The circumstances around that I haven't researched, but it would be, I'm sure there's a story there somewhere. Attitude, despite his documents, he still refused because the information was given to Jackson. And it's at this point that Jackson demands all waterways to the city being blocked because he knows from this communication the Brits are trying to find another way in and not taking a traditional approach. So that's when he orders all waterways to be blocked, okay? He refused to meet with their representative, Edward Livingston, who will later become very close to him. I don't want anything to do with this whatsoever. Jackson called them robbers, pirates, and hellish banditti. What a great word. And when he requests a pardon, Livingston's finally, he gets a chance to meet with Jackson, and they talk. And supposedly, as I said, Jackson would meet with Jean Lafitte, perhaps at his headquarters on Wall Street. Some say in Masparo's. I'm not exactly sure where or if it actually occurred, but because everything about Jean Lafitte's a bit elusive. He's almost like a UFO, you know. He suddenly changes his mind. This is so unlike Jackson. And that's what brought me to that question in that lecture in 2000. Battle of New Orleans, Livingston's head of the Committee of Public Safety, close to Jackson, becomes aide-de-camp to Jackson. He provided shot, powder, and cannon. They manned battery number 3. They had 2 members. One of them was BoNOHS. The other is Dominic Yu, maintain the batteries. And 210 yards from the river, it's now in the river because of the river has eroded the water there. 2 24-pound guns. They won praise for their effectiveness as gunners because they were good gunners, okay? And this is Jackson. I wouldn't be afraid to storm the gates of hell if I had Dominic Yu and BoNOHS for my lieutenants. Is this a change in the attitude? And that's what got me. And this is what steers to here. Now, I'm not going to get into a history of Freemasonry for 2 reasons. One, I don't have the time, and B, I don't have the knowledge because I'm not a member. And as they say, we're not a secret organization. We're an organization with secrets. So, but fundamentally, what it comes down to is the belief. They come to America in the 1730s. The fundamental belief is brotherly love, show tolerance, respect for all men, regardless of their station in life. Provide charity and care among themselves, strive for truth to require high standards. The idea being when 2 Masons meet and shake hands with their secret handshake, they speak on the level. You've got to believe one another. You'll never lie to another Mason. So when Jackson is confronted with both Livingston and Lafitte on the level, because of the spiritual connection, he has to believe it, okay? Here's Dominic Yu. Let's talk about him. Early life, he's born in 1775, perhaps 71, who knows? Yeah. He goes to Haiti. Some say it was Jean Delaine is where he was born. He's born Frederick Lafitte, brother to Jean and Pierre, 5'4", little guy. Drafted in 1800, fighting Napoleon in the French Revolution. He's sent to Haiti to defeat Toussaint L'Ouverture in the slave rebellion that's taken place there. He's scarred by a powder explosion. He then leaves, joins his brother Jean Lafitte in Louisiana because he killed an officer in a brawl. That's probably why he also changed his name, okay? This is the deal. He joins the chartered in San Domingo in 1801, San Domingue, the Grand Lodge of Pennsylvania is under their auspices. He joins as a member in 1811. Perhaps before, but the earliest record we have is 1811. He continued his membership throughout his life. Here you have a discussion of his membership, and on page 41 of the book, Dominic Yu is listed as a member of the Concord Lodge in 1812. Now, it's interesting. I don't know if you all know Alberta Lewis, by any chance, in Sebastopol Plantation, but I was in my office at the college just before the storm, working through this, and one day she walks up to the little cardboard box she found in the attic. She says, "Ron, you might be interested in some of this stuff." So I'm rooting through this, and I'm kind of figuring this whole story out, when all of a sudden, I find these little blue books, Tableau Concord, and there's Dominic Yu's name. Because her family is heavily steeped in the Masonic societies. So I'm saying, I can't believe it. I got confirmation right here in 1815, again in 18, it goes back to 1811. Dominic Yu is a very serious Mason. His death, he was happy for a number of years after the battle, lived with a busty blonde barmaid named Barbette. I mean, you can't write that. But he ran a bar, and he was basically poor, and nobody paid much attention to him until he died. He had a place on a tavern on St. Anne Street. Eventually, his body succumbed to the abuses endured over the years. I love that quote, which is probably true. Barbette probably gave him a hard time. He died in 1830. Next morning, businesses everywhere were closed. So it was almost like Roofie the Duck Lady, one of these people that walk around, nobody pays attention to. When you die, you suddenly realize that they were a character. They were part of who we are in New Orleans. That's kind of strange to compare Dominic Yu to Roofie, but, there is a similarity there, I imagine. He was buried in St. Louis, number 2. Alas, my brother, which is, again, a Masonic symbol. This is another reference to where he was buried, and the funeral of Captain Dominique, which takes place this afternoon at 3:30, and it's referring to people of the Legion coming to make sure you attend. Same here. So these are the call-outs, and this is back to 1830, copies of letters about his funeral. This is them cleaning up his headstone, and here you'll see the Masonic symbol on his grave. At one time, I was told the Catholic Church took it off, and then it came back on again, because there's been a lot of issues between the Catholic Church and the Masonic. And here is an article printed in Louisiana Lodge Light concerning Dominic Yu and the history in the Andrew Jackson Lodge in Chalmette. Edward Livingston. This is a Lafitte lawyer. Was brother to Ambassador Robert Livingston, Louisiana Purchase fame. He was a successful attorney, and he becomes a close friend of Andrew Jackson. They were one of 2 congressmen who joined with Jackson in voting against a bill declaring George Washington a great man at the end of his term. Now, you look at that, you say there must be some animosity towards Washington. Maybe, maybe not. Masons don't see somebody as a great man. You don't elevate somebody to that level. So it could just be a simple, because Washington was a Mason. So it might have been related to that more than anything else. He flees New York after going into bankruptcy, comes to Louisiana, pays off his bills in New York. And in the process of doing so, he then turns around and is a master of the lodge in New York, and he addresses them of the Erin Lodge as master in 1802. 1807 charters the first English-speaking lodge here in Louisiana, Louisiana Lodge number 1. Connected with the New York Lodge, he becomes the Grand Master. Edward Livingston is not ashamed publicly to declare his acceptance of the same office of Grand Master of the Order, John Quincy Adams. So he's very proud and open about his association with being a Mason. Andrew Jackson. Is Andy? After his failure to win appointment as a governor, Jackson returned to private affairs and was somewhat active in the operations of the local Masonic Lodge in Greenville, Tennessee, under the dispensation of the Grand Lodge of North Carolina. Peggy Eaton affair, if you remember, that was a major scandal during his presidency. Timberlake were Masons, and neither could he have criminal intercourse with another Mason's wife without being the most abandoned of men. The reason I mention that is because it shows the deep relationship and respect Masons have for one another. Okay? Jackson first becomes involved in North Carolina, becomes an honorary member of Harmony Lodge in Tennessee in 1800, later becomes master of the Harmony Lodge, Grand Master of Tennessee, maintained throughout his life. A Master Mason should understand that it is his duty to help others. Jean Lafitte. Now this one's tricky, because I had always heard that Jean Lafitte was a Mason, but there was no evidence to that effect. Grand Lodge of Louisiana. I gave this lecture to the Andrew Jackson Lodge right down there in Araby. And I mentioned where I am right now, that there's a lot of talk about about Jean Lafitte being a Mason. There's no proof, no evidence. When the lecture was over with, and I'm still confused, when the lecture was over with, attended the lecture, informed me there was evidence in Masonic archives to prove Jean Lafitte was a Mason. The Grand Master of Louisiana was there. And he came up and he said, Jean Lafitte's a Mason. I said, really? I said, but there's no evidence. He says, no, we have it, but our record's a secret. Take my word for it, Jean Lafitte's a Mason. I said, well, good. This helps close that circle. Then my wife and I attended the Louisiana Historical Society banquet. Was this Friday night? Or the 8th. I happened to be sitting at a table next to Sally Senor. And somebody, she's quietly sitting there drinking and not paying attention to too much. Somebody mentions Mason, and this woman just explodes with knowledge. So I find out that she was the archivist for the Masonic group for years. So I said, okay. I said, now I got a question for you. So I posed the issue of Jean Lafitte, and she says, well, there's obviously evidence on Dominic Q. There's evidence on Pierre. But in the archives, there's really nothing firm on Jean Lafitte. So now I have the master of the Louisiana Lodge saying yes, and the archivist saying no, so it's your choice. Because I'm stuck on the horns of a dilemma. I don't know what to believe at this point, but I tend to lean towards the archivist when it comes down to that, okay? However, the archivist says 3 years, there's no official record. Governor Claiborne, guess what? According to December 2016 article published by the Grand Lodge of Louisiana, the worshipful brother Will Gray, Andrew Jackson entered New Orleans as a Freemason, attended the lodge with Governor Claiborne. Claiborne was a member of the Holston Lodge of Tennessee. Claiborne apprenticed to Perfect Union Lodge in 1809, first Masonic governor. The pelican feeding its young is a Masonic symbol of the 18th degree Scottish Rite. That's the symbol on the Louisiana state flag. This is a letter here that's dated 1809. It talks about him. The first part is him requesting admission into the local Masonic. The second is the fact that he has now been accepted. So if you piece it all together, you have to ask, was there a Masonry the key between these 4 individuals who are absolutely critical to what happened at the Battle of New Orleans? Did it open the door to their cooperation amongst one another? The Masonic Code, Jackson, Livingston, at least one Lafitte brother, Frederick, were Masons, as was Claiborne. They held one another highest respect, spoke on the level and matters of importance, and regardless of social standing, that's an important element, must accept one another as equals in the brotherhood. This connection may have facilitated Jackson, missing an N, willingness to consider his view of the Barratarians and change his attitude towards Jean Lafitte at this critical juncture where he needed their help, they needed his help, and there was a crisis taking place. And this may have been the ability to change their relationship into a cooperative one. As often happens in the course of history, circumstances beneath the surface dictate the outcome of important events. In this instance, the Masonic connection may have played a key role in overcoming the vast gulf of differences that separated some very powerful men at a critical juncture in New Orleans history, the city's battle for its survival. Could they have been found common ground because of the Masonic connection? And as an epilogue, in Araby, the St. Bernard Parish located Andrew Jackson Masonic Lodge in Reggio before the storm. I'm not sure if they opened up again. I heard they might have. They have? I was trying to find a picture of it. They actually have a place now? Because I looked and tried to find out exactly where it was. Okay, because I want to get a picture. It's a Dominic U Lodge, right, because they lost it in Katrina. And yeah, it was totally, I had some lectures I'd given there because this was the old Dominic U Lodge. And I had given some lectures there as well. In February 1968, it was established, the Dominic U Lodge, number 468. And this is the sign that was in front of it just prior to the storm. And this is the Andrew Jackson Lodge here in Araby, Lodge number 428. And that's the symbol, Andrew Jackson, Lodge 428, F&M. So that's it. So it's kind of brief, but that's the story as I see it as a connection, and I think it's a very important connection between these 4 individuals and the Battle of New Orleans. So thank you so much.